once a battle zone. Natural caverns like this are found throughout Okinawa, where they are called gamo. A large number of human bones were discovered. They were casualties of the Battle of Okinawa 70 years ago. In 1945, in the last months of the Pacific War, the American and Japanese armies fought a fierce battle on Okinawa. More than 200,000 soldiers and civilians died during the battle. Of these, at least 120,000 were Okinawan civilians. This was the only land battle fought in a densely populated territory of Japan. However, in many cases, the heavy losses killed entire families, so it's difficult to make an accurate count of the deaths. We recently obtained access to records that could help us grasp the overall picture of these casualties. This is a survey of battle deaths that Okinawa Prefecture has kept out of public access. We analyzed the records of more than 80,000 civilians whose date and place of death was confirmed by the survey. The analysis revealed in detail how the civilian deaths mounted day by day. Why did so many civilians die? The Imperial Japanese Army was severely undermanned in Okinawa. Civilians were sent into battle.
一番危ない仕事してたんじゃないですかね。何もそれが理不尽であろうが何であろうがね。
The American attack swept up civilians, and the killing became more indiscriminate as the weeks passed. The accounts of civilians were recorded in some 1,000 audio tapes. They described scenes of death in vivid detail.
みんな戦死の子は最後の切り込みでみんな子供を思い知って弾当たってきて中で亡くなって。
The overall picture of the Battle of Okinawa comes into focus. This is the reality as we understand it in the 70th year since the battle. The beautiful island of Okinawa, ringed with coral reefs. 70 years ago, this sea was filled with over 1,000 American Navy vessels. There is an enormous amount of film that the U.S. military shot during the battle. Experts reviewed all of this footage and determined the date and place each role was filmed. The American military launched its invasion of the main island of Okinawa on April 1st. The invasion was documented, beginning before dawn. It was the largest amphibious landing of the Pacific War. Newly developed weapons were used on Okinawa for the first time. The footage shows the overwhelming force of the invading army, which numbered 540,000. At the beginning of the Pacific War, the Japanese military quickly gained control over a vast territory. But the Allied forces, led by the U.S. military, regained control over the islands of the Asian Pacific one after another and penetrated the absolute national defense zone. The invasion of Japan loomed. The Japanese military stationed about 100,000 troops on Okinawa, with the aim of preventing the invasion of the mainland. Imperial headquarters of the Japanese military reported directly to the emperor. Its strategic plan stated that Okinawa is the front line of defense for the imperial homeland, aimed to inflict heavy casualties and wear down the enemy as far as possible. The 32nd Army was stationed in Okinawa and charged with fighting a war of attrition to delay the expected invasion of Japan as long as possible. April 1st, under the cover of a naval bombardment of more than 100,000 shells, the American military began landing on Okinawa at 8:30 a.m. It was the beginning of a merciless battle that was later described as the most ghastly corner of hell. It was not only the Japanese military that awaited the advancing American forces. As many as 500,000 civilians remained on the island. Commanding the American invasion was Lieutenant General Simon Buckner, Jr. He was accompanied by aides who kept an account of the unfolding battle. Master Sergeant James McGregor Burns was one of these Army historians. We discovered a copy of this battle diary, which had been classified by the American military. In the detailed reports of the conflict, one word appears repeatedly: civilian. "4,700 Japs killed on Ieshima. 2,000 were Okinawans fighting on the side of the Japs." The number of civilian dead was overwhelming. This was the only battle of the Pacific War fought on densely populated Japanese territory. But the casualties were so extensive that it has been difficult to construct a comprehensive picture of what took place. We recently obtained access to documents that provide important clues to this history. They are the results of the only survey ever conducted by the Okinawan government to document wartime deaths on a household-by-household basis. Because they contain private information, the documents are not available to the public. We obtained records of where and when people died, minus their names. We digitized this massive amount of information for analysis. The data covered over 80,000 civilians, excluding those for whom the date and place of death is undetermined, and also excluding Okinawans who were drafted into military service. The analysis reveals how civilian deaths accumulated by tracking the shifting patterns of their occurrence on a day-by-day basis. On April 1st, the invading Americans gained control over 2 strategic airfields, then headed south toward the headquarters of the Japanese military in Shuri. On the day of the invasion, civilian deaths numbered 292. Plans to evacuate civilians to safe havens had not been fully implemented, and many civilians remained in the battle zone. The Japanese military had left very few forces to defend them. The 32nd Army had been ordered by Imperial headquarters to wage a war of attrition so it concentrated its limited forces around the Army's headquarters in Shuri. On April 20th, the number of deaths spiked dramatically on a small island in the north, Iejima. Half of the civilian deaths recorded on the island, 781 people, occurred in just one day. These were not simply collateral deaths caused by the battle. There were other reasons as well. The island of Iejima is now a popular tourist destination. 70 years ago, the U.S. military attacked from the sea, the air, and on land. Footage from April 16th records the American landing on the island. The American objective was a large airfield on the island. Their aim was to use it as a base to launch air attacks on the Japanese mainland. The second-ranking officer of the 32nd Army, Chief of Staff Isamu Cho, addressed the Okinawan civilians before the battle began. All residents of Okinawa must become soldiers. They must smash the enemy with the fighting spirit of each one kill 10. An historian has carefully preserved some 1,000 audio tapes of oral history from the Battle of Okinawa. The Oral History Project began 40 years ago, when the post-war American occupation of Okinawa ended, and many people began to talk about their wartime experiences for the first time. They described their clear memories in vivid accounts.
私はヒッピー班の人なんかと一緒に切り込みに出たかったわけ。この2泊かのよりみんな飲んでね、美味しいのだけだって。一人でもアメリカ殺しながら面白いね。だからそうね。
Attackers carried handmade explosives and flung themselves at the American troops, often sacrificing their lives. The residual force of Japanese soldiers mounted the final attack on April 20th. Women on the island also joined in the attack.
もう最後はみんな子供をんぼして弾当たって子供におっぱいあげようとして下ろしたらもうお店なんか出なくなってみんな戦士の子は最後の切り込みで最後は安国神社にみんな兵隊と一緒に祀られるからって言ってもうね全部死なないといかんと思うから何でもないですよ。あの時は嬉しいんじゃなかったか、ね、
嬉しいっていう気持ち。
"100 million glorious deaths" was Japan's slogan at the end of the war. The idea spread that all Japanese citizens, not only the military, should give their lives to defend the state, with the emperor at its core. On the island of Iejima, group suicides also took place. Yasunobu Oshiro was then 9 years old. His home was destroyed by the American bombardment, and he fled with his family to this cave.
この石に私の親父はこの辺にいたと思いますよ。
American soldiers came to the mouth of the cave, appealing to people to surrender. Oshiro later made a drawing of the scene in the cave. Oshiro was held in the arms of his mother. Around them were 26 neighbors and relatives. A relative who had been drafted into the army called out, "Now we will die," and detonated a bomb he held. When Oshiro came to his senses, he saw that people who were familiar to him had been completely transfigured. Only 4 people survived.
もうみんな死を覚悟しているもんだから何も思い残すことなく、死んだと思います。ただ生き残りってですね、よかったと今思っているわけですよ。
From the end of April into May, the most intensive fighting of the Battle of Okinawa took place. This was the battle over Shuri, where the Japanese Army headquarters was located. On May 10th, the archival footage records a newly developed weapon the American military had introduced into the battle. It was an armored vehicle that carried flamethrowers that could project a stream of fire over a distance of 100 meters. Despite encountering fierce resistance, the American military steadily pushed the Japanese defense line south toward Shuri. The U.S. military attempted to minimize casualties among civilians who remained in the battle zone. The battle diary that Army historian Master Sergeant Burns and others kept notes that the Americans built detention camps to house 300,000 civilians and readied the supplies necessary to feed them. We bear no malice toward Okinawans, only toward the Jap militarists. However, the data for civilian deaths recorded that 13,800 had died by April 24th. Casualties increased during the fight over Shuri in the following month, when 21,600 deaths were recorded. Many of these were civilians who had been mobilized by the military just before the Battle of Okinawa began. They were called up under a system called defense conscription. Defense conscription is a system whereby the military drafts local residents to supplement its forces in wartime. In the final stages, junior high school boys, aged 14 and older, were subject to the system. In Okinawa, more than 22,000 people were conscripted in this way. This amounted to about 20% of the fighting force deployed on the main island of Okinawa. A cave used by the Japanese army remains at a spot was on the Shuri defense line. Faced with overwhelming American firepower, Japanese forces went underground and adopted a strategy of lying in wait for the enemy's advance. Civilians mingled with the military in these underground caverns, which contributed to the surge in civilian deaths. There is a former Imperial Army soldier who witnessed the defense conscription close at hand. Toshinori Hamamoto fought on the Shuri defense line as a private first class. More than 90% of his unit was killed in battle.
軍事訓練なんてしませんよ。間に合うわけでないし、その暇ない。もうその日から実戦ですから。だからそういう意味ではかわいそうだったよね。一番危ない仕事してたんじゃないですかね。弾がいつ来るか分かんないわけですから。そこに出てきゃ危ないんですから。出されれば危険にさらされるわけですよね。
Among the 1,000 tapes of the accounts of Okinawan civilians, there was one interview with a defense conscript who was sent to the front lines.
もう日が暮れてからですよ。切り込み出されて、寝て起きられと。鉄砲もないですよ。おたけりとテルランぐらいですよ。爆破するときは大体言っても戦争の 下に入ってから爆発させる。もう死にに行くわけさ。
Apart from the defense conscription program, other civilians were pushed into service on the battlefront. Children and the elderly, and many women were supposed to have been evacuated to safe havens in and outside of Okinawa. But in actual fact, many remained in the battle zone and were compelled to serve the army.
弾薬は何回も運んでますからね。夜は裏読みなんかしてましたからね。
Mitsuko Tokeshi and other young women from her neighborhood served in various places on the front line in the battle for Shuri. She took shelter in the underground caverns with the military and, in the face of danger, was made to help with the work there.
おにぎりこうして握ったり、壕のすぐ入り口にこうしてそこでやりよったんですけどね。すぐ直撃。あ、長の方向から。後ろにそうポコッとみんな当たったんですよ。女の人が2、3名いなくなったり、体がやられたりして。
Was no effort made to avoid the loss of civilian lives? We interviewed a former Japanese army officer who fought on the front lines at Shuri. Former Captain Koichi Ito was a battalion commander. His unit was not only undermanned, it also suffered shortages of ammunition and food.
戦をするだけの能力を持ってなかったんですよ。なんとかうまく自分をもっと避難させる努力をしなきゃなんなかったんじゃないか。戦うだけに頭がいっぱいで、軍としては住民のことまで考えるゆとりがなかったかもしれませんね。
By May 14th, the American forces were nearing the Japanese headquarters in Shuri. There, an intense battle took place, in which control of a strategic position called Sugarloaf Hill changed hands 11 times. According to American military records, the Marine Corps suffered some 4,000 casualties. The archival footage from around this time shows soldiers who were suffering psychological disorders. In the 1-month period of the intense battle for Shuri, more than 21,600 civilians lost their lives. These numbers reflect how the American assault had become increasingly indiscriminate. When we examined footage taken near Sugarloaf Hill with an expert on these archives, we discovered a shocking scene. In the area where the American forces are concentrating their fire, a number of civilians appear. The historian notes that soldiers would never expose themselves to rifle fire in this manner.
あそこに取り残された住民たち結構多くて、住民の可能性もあるの。まあこの距離だったら民間人か肉眼で見てたら分かるはずなんですよ。
One by one, the figures are targeted and topple. If these were civilians, why were they shot? We found a former Marine who survived the Battle of Sugarloaf Hill. Former Corporal Joe Drago was 19 when he was sent to Okinawa. He says it was difficult to distinguish between Japanese soldiers and Okinawan civilians, and he was suspicious of everyone.
And he's going to kill you if you don't kill him first. And if he's still alive, he may come back to kill you. So you kill him so he don't come back.
One night, Drago's unit encountered a group of people who turned out to be civilians on the move.
All of a sudden, I could see somebody in the crowd start running. Ludwig in the foxhole, he pulled the trigger, and the bullets just missed our legs. So Ed and I, we emptied a 45. Boom, 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 boom. All you could hear was the crying, the screaming, and we'd boom, boom, stop it, going crazy. And then the next morning, saw all the bodies.
Incidents occurred that deepened the suspicions of the U.S. forces. In the midst of the Battle of Okinawa, Army intelligence released an analysis of Japanese Army tactics. Included was a photograph of a Japanese soldier wearing a kimono to disguise himself as a civilian. Captain Koichi Ito, the former battalion commander. He himself never gave such an order. But there were men in his unit who disguised themselves as civilians.
沖縄人の服を着て行ったんですよ。だけどね、その時私咎めなかったですよ。せっかくここまでしてやろうと思って気持ちをそぐわけにもいかないから、どうせどっちしたって死ぬんだから、いいやもう思いにやらしてやろうと、そういうような気持ちね。
The indiscriminate character of the American assault turned ever more extreme. When soldiers discovered an underground cave, they closed off avenues of escape and used flamethrowers to incinerate the interior of the caves. Often there were civilians among those in the caves.
$150前に来たら、その戦車砲というのでその入り口をぶち壊すの。火炎宝石というのも巻かれたんですよ、壕の中で。おじさんがもう生きておって焼けるの。パチパチパチして。もう何十名こんなにしてみんな戦死なさって。
The woman who gave the account of her experience in the cave is Mariko Ichi, now 91 years old.
攻撃しながらも片手はビール持ってるね。片手を飲みながらだから酔っ払って寝る人もいるわけさ。それがアメリカなの。だからもう機械が戦争しているんであって、自分が激戦に行ってみて初めて、ああ戦争というのは同じ人でも殺し合いだね、そう思った。
May 31st, the Japanese headquarters in Shuri fell to the Americans. The outcome of the fierce fighting between the U.S. and Japan was effectively decided. Master Sergeant Burns had witnessed the death of soldiers and innumerable civilians. Sprawling on both sides of the hill were American and Japanese dead, mostly the former. Their bodies were broken and blackened. Here was one of the grimmest scenes I have encountered on Okinawa. When we examine the data of the 82,074 civilian deaths, we discover that more than 46,000 of these civilians died in June, after the fall of Shuri. Despite the fact that the outcome of the battle was already determined, nearly 60% of the deaths occurred during that month. Casualties were especially high during the week preceding the cessation of organized Japanese resistance on June 23rd. On one day alone, some 5,500 people were killed. Why did the fighting continue? Within the 32nd Army, opinion was divided over whether to wage a last-ditch battle in Shuri or to withdraw to the south and continue the war of attrition. The commander of the Japanese Army, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, made the decision to buy as much time as possible by continuing the battle in the south. The 32nd Army moved its headquarters to the southern tip of the main island of Okinawa. Defense conscripts and others who had been mobilized, along with civilians who had no place to shelter, poured into the south, which was soon flooded with people. What was to be done with the large number of civilians that had fled to the south? The Army Battle Diary reveals that the matter was discussed during a strategic conference of the American military. Concerning the 125,000 to 130,000 civilians in the south, suppose at the proper time we propose a truce to bring the civilians in. Colonel Ely has uncovered a complete evacuation plan. However, these proposals were never carried out. By June 6th, U.S. forces had launched a mopping-up operation in the south. The Battle of Okinawa had entered its final stage. Naval forces circled around to the south and began an intense bombardment from the sea. Casualties increased rapidly. Civilians searched for shelter as the steady rains of June continued to fall. From above, the American military poured down a ceaseless rain of artillery shells. The only spots that provided protection were underground tunnels and the natural caverns that dotted the hillsides. In the southern city of Itoman alone, some 240 such shelters have been identified to date. 92 of these sites were used for military operations, while civilians sought refuge in the remaining caves. As American troops continued their southward advance, the number of remaining spots to find refuge narrowed by the day. There were instances where Japanese soldiers forced civilians to leave their underground shelters.
日本の兵隊が来まして、おばあさん連中皆出てけって出ていく。あんた方は今来て今出ろと言ったってね、ストーン卵を振ってるじゃないかと。出ろというのはすぐその場でもう死ぬあれじゃないかと言ったらね、何貴様って言ってすぐ何言ったってすぐ拳銃出しましてね、撃とうとしたんですよ。
The soldiers were also pressed to the wall. The former private, Toshinori Hamamoto, who had fought on the Shuri defense line. He was wounded and left behind near the front line, but he managed to make it to a cave in the south under his own power. The army was no longer functioning as a fighting force, he says.
我々の中に入れとくわけにもいかないんですよ。それかといって私らが離れてね入り口に住むわけにもいかないし、お前さんらはアメリカに見つかっても、殺されないだろうと。だけど実際は兵隊は自分の身を守るだけでやっとこらん。だからそういうことからいくとね分かんないね。
The tragedies mounted, day by day.
6つぐらい男の子が母ちゃんを押して泣いたから、すごいこの子のためにって親も前にして、そのまま口伏せ入れですね。口を伏せ入れ、圧迫して死んだと。もう怖くなってですね、私たちはみんな震えてですね。
In the caves at the southern tip of Okinawa, some of those who had fled Shuri took shelter. Mitsuko Tokeshi had spent 3 months along with the troops on the front lines. Physically wasted, she lay collapsed on the floor of the cave. When her sister, 2 years older, left the cave to fetch water for Mitsuko, a shell exploded.
反響欄ですね。反響欄、顔もきれいに、でもこうして触ったらこの穴開いてるんですよね。動かないし、まだあったかいけど、どうしていいかわからない。何を考えたか。いらっしゃいませ。ありがとうございます。
Mitsuko turned 88 this year. She still suffers 70 years later.
もう思い出したくもないですよ。だけど嫌ですよ、あのことは。もう思い出すと夜も寝られませんね。
If the decision had been made to end the fighting sooner, much suffering could have been avoided.
なぜ私たちは、しかも沖縄の人間はなぜこんなに、どうしようもないですけどね、それはもう国の仕業だから。でも悔しいですね。姉と一緒に亡くなっておれば、一生こんな苦しみをしなくてもよかったのに、しまいにはもうなぜと、ただなぜとしか。
The American military reached the southern tip of Okinawa. 3 days before the Japanese army ended organized resistance, the data on civilian deaths show a spike. At the southernmost Kian Peninsula, civilians who had no place to take refuge threw themselves off the cliffs, one after another.
It's hell.
Former Corporal Glenn Newt participated in the mopping up operations in southern Okinawa. The scenes he saw then are burned into his memory.
It was devastating. It was one of the hardest things to handle for me was to see those children suffer and maimed and dead. And you sit there and you'd look at them and you'd ask your God to, please end this thing. Why would you know when you haven't got a chance? Why would you die? Don't you love your family? Want to take a chance, outside chance, go home to family?
On June 23rd, 32nd Army Commander Lieutenant General Ushijima issued a final order, fight on to the end, and committed suicide. This marked the end of organized fighting by the Japanese military. For months afterwards, former Captain Koichi Ito hid in an underground cave and engaged in guerrilla warfare. He didn't surrender to the Americans until after the war ended, in late August. He wonders what he was fighting for.
国民を守らなくちゃ軍隊の役目の一つを果たしてないことなんだ。だからたくさんの人が戦場で巻き込んで亡くなったってことは軍隊の務めの一部を守れなかったってことで、これは辛いですよ本当に軍としては。要するに沖縄戦はずっと進めていくから日本軍の愚かな戦争に到達するんです。それだけのことよ。
The American battle historian, Master Sergeant James Burns. The battle, he chronicled, caused more wartime deaths than any other battle of the Pacific War.
Janet.
Janet?
Yes.
Hello,
yes.
nice meeting
Hello.
you.
James Burns died in 2014 at the age of 95, once a battle zone. Natural caverns like this are found throughout Okinawa, where they are called gama.
船が今そこ。
A large number of human bones were discovered. They were casualties of the Battle of Okinawa 70 years ago. In 1945, in the last months of the Pacific War, the American and Japanese armies fought a fierce battle on Okinawa. More than 200,000 soldiers and civilians died during the battle. Of these, at least 120,000 were Okinawan civilians. This was the only land battle fought in a densely populated territory of Japan. However, in many cases, the heavy losses killed entire families, so it's difficult to make an accurate count of the deaths. We recently obtained access to records that could help us grasp the overall picture of these casualties. This is a survey of battle deaths that Okinawa Prefecture has kept out of public access. We analyzed the records of more than 80,000 civilians whose date and place of death was confirmed by the survey. The analysis revealed in detail how the civilian deaths mounted day by day. Why did so many civilians die? The Imperial Japanese Army was severely undermanned in Okinawa. Civilians were sent into battle.
一番危ない仕事してたんじゃないですかね。何もそれが理不尽であろうが何であろうがね。
The American attack swept up civilians, and the killing became more indiscriminate as the weeks passed. The accounts of civilians were recorded in some 1,000 audio tapes. They described scenes of death in vivid detail.
みんな戦士の子は最後の切り込みで、みんな子供を帽子して弾当たってきて中で亡くなって。
The overall picture of the Battle of Okinawa comes into focus. This is the reality as we understand it in the 70th year since the battle. The beautiful island of Okinawa, ringed with coral reefs. 70 years ago, This sea was filled with over 1,000 American Navy vessels. There is an enormous amount of film that the U.S. military shot during the battle. Experts reviewed all of this footage and determined the date and place each role was filmed. The American military launched its invasion of the main island of Okinawa on April 1st. The invasion was documented, beginning before dawn. It was the largest amphibious landing of the Pacific War. Newly developed weapons were used on Okinawa for the first time. The footage shows the overwhelming force of the invading army, which numbered 540,000. At the beginning of the Pacific War, the Japanese military quickly gained control over a vast territory. But the Allied forces, led by the U.S. military, regained control over the islands of the Asian Pacific one after another and penetrated the absolute national defense zone. The invasion of Japan loomed. The Japanese military stationed about 100,000 troops on Okinawa with the aim of preventing the invasion of the mainland. Imperial headquarters of the Japanese military reported directly to the emperor. Its strategic plan stated that Okinawa is the front line of defense for the imperial homeland, aimed to inflict heavy casualties and wear down the enemy as far as possible. The 32nd Army was stationed in Okinawa and charged with fighting a war of attrition to delay the expected invasion of Japan as long as possible. April 1st. Under the cover of a naval bombardment of more than 100,000 shells, the American military began landing on Okinawa at 8:30 a.m. It was the beginning of a merciless battle that was later described as the most ghastly corner of hell. It was not only the Japanese military that awaited the advancing American forces. As many as 500,000 civilians remained on the island. Commanding the American invasion was Lieutenant General Simon Buckner, Jr. He was accompanied by aides who kept an account of the unfolding battle. Master Sergeant James McGregor Burns was one of these Army historians. We discovered a copy of this battle diary, which had been classified by the American military. In the detailed reports of the conflict, one word appears repeatedly: civilian. "4,700 Japs killed on Ieshima. 2,000 were Okinawans fighting on the side of the Japs." The number of civilian dead was overwhelming. This was the only battle of the Pacific War fought on densely populated Japanese territory.